The night air was heavy with smoke and strange smells. The alien market was alive with noise. Traders shouting, buyers haggling, cages rattling as creatures inside pressed against the bars. Lanterns hung from broken wires, throwing weak yellow light across the cracked stone floor. Shadows moved everywhere, tall figures with sharp voices and cruel eyes. In the last row of cages, far from the center, a small alien girl sat curled up. Her hair was messy, her clothes were torn, and her glowing skin patterns, once bright, were now dim and fading. She hugged her knees close to her chest, trying to stay warm against the cold metal bars. Around her, people laughed and pointed. "No one wants that one," a trader shouted. His voice was rough, his teeth sharp as he grinned. "She is useless, too weak to work, too silent to please, not even worth a coin." Buyers walked past without slowing. Some wrinkled their noses, others chuckled. A pair of children pointed at her, calling her names before being dragged away by their parents, every word cut deeper. But the girl made no sound. She had learned long ago that crying only brought more cruelty. Hours passed and the crowd grew thinner. The richer buyers had already left with their prizes. Tall slaves with muscles, strange beasts with claws, glittering creatures in golden. Chains only the unwanted remained, and among them the alien girl seemed the most forgotten. The trader slammed the bars of her cage. "Pathetic," he muttered. "Even rats get more interest than you." He turned away to shout at another buyer, leaving her in silence. The girl lowered her head, her silver eyes dull. She had stopped hoping long ago. No one would ever choose her. No one would ever open this cage, but then, as the market lights began to dim, another figure entered. A human man dressed in simple gray work clothes. His boots were dusty, his hands calloused. His hair was messy from a long day. He looked out of place among the bright, greedy buyers. He carried no weapon, no fine cloak, only a bag slung across his shoulder. The traders laughed when they saw him. "A janitor," one hissed. "What is he doing here?" The human ignored them. His eyes moved slowly over the cages, pausing for a moment on each face. He did not laugh, he did not mock. He simply looked, and his gaze carried something most here had never seen. Quiet kindness. When his eyes reached the alien girl, he stopped. For a moment the noise of the market faded. The girl looked up, confused. No one had ever held their gaze on her for so long. His expression was not cruel, not mocking. It was thoughtful, almost sad. The trader rushed over, eager to sell. "Not that one, human. She is broken, weak, not worth your time. Look here. Strong arms, good legs, hard workers. Take one of these. Instead," he slapped the bars of another cage, showing off a taller alien boy. But the human did not move. His eyes stayed on the girl. "How much?" he asked softly. The trader froze. "What? You want her? She is worthless. You would waste good credits, choose another, any other." "How much?" the human repeated. His voice was calm, but firm. The trader shook his head, still laughing. "For her, a handful of scraps. She will bring you nothing. But trouble, you will regret it, human." Still, the human reached into his bag. He pulled out a few worn coins, not much, barely enough for a meal. He placed them in the trader's hand. The trader sneered but did not argue. Money was money. Even scraps were better than nothing. The key turned in the lock. The cage door creaked open. The girl's heart raced. She pressed back against the bars, her body trembling. She did not believe this was real. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe it was another cruel game. But the human crouched down, his voice low and gentle. "Come on," he whispered. "You're free now." Her breath caught. She stared at him, searching his face for lies. But all she saw was tired kindness. His hands were rough, his clothes dirty, but his eyes held something she had never known. Hope. Slowly, with shaky steps, she crawled out of the cage, her legs weak, her arms thin. The human steadied her when she almost fell. The warmth of his hand felt strange. Safe. The traders scoffed, the buyers laughed. "Fool," one muttered, "wasting his life on trash." But the human did not look back. He placed his bag on his shoulder, guided the girl gently through the crowd, and walked out of the market. The night was colder outside, the streets empty and quiet. For the first time, the alien girl was not behind bars. For the first time, she took a step into freedom. And beside her, a human who should have ignored her had chosen instead to give her a chance. A cage closed behind them, but a story had just begun. The small apartment was quiet. The human pushed the rusty door open with his shoulder, guiding the alien girl gently inside. She hesitated at the doorway, her bare feet frozen on the step. Her eyes moved across the room. It was not rich, not clean, but it was a home. There was a bed in the corner, a table with one chair, shelves stacked with cleaning tools and broken parts. The human placed his bag on the table. He turned to her and spoke softly. "Sit." His voice was calm, without anger. She lowered her eyes and slowly stepped inside. Every movement was careful, like she expected a trap. She sat on the floor instead of the chair, curling her knees close again. He noticed but said nothing. Instead, he opened a small box from his bag. Inside was bread and a small piece of dried meat. He placed it on a plate and set it down near her. The smell made her stomach twist. She had not eaten real food in days, maybe weeks. Still, she hesitated, glancing at him. Her past had taught her that food often came with pain. The human sat down on the chair and leaned back. He made no move toward her. He did not force her, did not laugh, only waited. At last, hunger was stronger than fear. She picked up the bread with shaky fingers and bit it. Tears filled her eyes. As the taste spread on her tongue, she ate quickly, almost choking. He poured her water from a tin cup and slid it to her. She drank, the cool liquid burning her throat. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The human watched silently, his hands folded together, his face tired but steady. She did not understand why. Why had he chosen her when even her own people had turned away, when the traders said she was worthless? Why waste his coins on her? He broke the silence. "My name is Daniel," he said. His words were simple, slow, so she could follow. "You are safe here." She stared at him, confused. She did not know if she should speak. Her voice was small, rough. "Safe," she whispered, repeating the word like it was strange. Daniel nodded once. "Yes, safe." The room grew warm with the faint light of a small lamp. Outside, the city was still noisy, voices rising from streets and markets, but here the air was calmer. Daniel stood, pulled an old blanket from a shelf, and offered it to her. She froze, expecting the cloth to be a chain or a trick, but he simply draped it over her shoulders. The softness shocked her. She closed her eyes, holding the fabric tight. For so long she had been cold. The blanket felt like fire. Safe fire. Daniel did not ask questions. He did not demand to know where she came from, who had sold her, or why her glowing patterns had grown dim. He only gave her space. Later that night, as he fixed a broken light on his table, she watched him. His hands moved with skill. Even though his tools were old, she wondered why someone like him, someone who worked so hard, would choose to save her. The market's laughter still echoed in her head. Fool, wasting his life on trash. But here, in this small room, she felt something new. Hope tried to rise again, fragile and thin. But far away, in the dark corners of the market, trouble was already growing. The traders had not forgotten the insult. They whispered among themselves that the human had mocked their trade. They spoke of taking the girl back, of punishing the one who dared buy what should have been thrown away. The alien girl shivered. She did not know the danger yet, but she felt the weight of fear pressing on her chest. Daniel glanced at her, reading her silence. He spoke again, his voice steady. "No one will hurt you here." The words were simple, but they wrapped around her like the blanket. Her silver eyes met his for the first time without fear. He did not look away. In that moment, something invisible passed between them, not ownership, not pity, but the beginning of trust. She whispered again, this time a little stronger. "Safe?" Daniel nodded, and for the first time that night, a faint smile touched his lips. The morning light slipped through the cracked window, painting thin golden lines across the dusty floor. The alien girl sat curled up in the corner, still wrapped in the blanket Daniel had given her. Her silver eyes blinked slowly, adjusting to the strange peace. For the first time she was not woken by shouts, by chains, or by the sting of a whip. Instead, she woke to silence. Daniel was already up, sweeping the floor with his old broom. His movements were steady, practiced. He worked the same way he had in the halls of the academy where no one noticed him, only the human janitor who cleaned. When everyone else was gone, now he swept his own small apartment as if cleaning could chase away the shadows that lived there. The girl watched, her head tilted slightly. His work seemed strange to her. Why would a man with so little care so much to keep it neat? When he noticed her eyes on him, he gave a small nod. "Hungry?" he asked in his calm voice. She blinked, hesitated, then nodded once. He set down the broom, opened a metal tin, and placed a piece of bread and an apple on the table. The smell made her stomach twist with longing. She crept closer, careful as, if each step might break the fragile piece, she reached for the food but paused. Her hand hovering, her eyes flicked to him, waiting for the trick, the slap, the punishment that always followed in the market. But Daniel only leaned back in his chair, resting his arms. "Eat," he said simply. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the bread. She bit slowly this time, trying not to choke. The taste filled her, and tears rose in her eyes. Daniel pretended not to see, letting her keep her dignity. When she was finished, he pushed the apple. Toward her she hesitated again, then took it carefully. She chewed in silence, her silver eyes never leaving his face. Every moment around him confused her. He gave without demanding. He looked without cruelty. He spoke without shouting. Later, Daniel stepped outside to his work. He repaired small machines for neighbors, fixed leaking pipes, and carried heavy boxes for merchants. It was the kind of work no one else wanted, but he did it without complaint. The alien girl followed at a distance, quiet as a shadow. She watched him lift, bend, and sweat. His strength was not in his muscles, but in his patience. His silence carried more weight than the trader's loud voices ever had. When children ran past in the street, they pointed and whispered about her glowing skin. Some laughed, some sneered. One boy tossed a stone near her feet. She flinched, stepping back. Her heart raced, the same shame she had always felt rising. Again, Daniel noticed. He set down the heavy box he was carrying and placed himself between her and the children. His face was calm but firm. The boys ran off, muttering. "You belong here," Daniel said softly to her. His words were slow so she could understand. Her lips trembled. She shook her head, pointing to herself, then lowering her hand to the ground. Her meaning was clear. She thought she was lower than dirt. Daniel crouched to meet her eyes. "No," he said firmly. "Not dirt, not trash." His hand tapped her chest gently. "Alive. You belong." She froze, his words echoing inside her. They were simple, but no one had ever spoken them to her before. Slowly she touched her chest where his hand had been, repeating the word in a whisper. "Belong." That night, the city outside glowed with neon lights. Voices carried from the streets. But inside Daniel's apartment, the silence was soft. The girl sat on the floor, tracing patterns in the dust with her finger. She did not understand human letters, but she copied shapes she had seen on walls. Daniel watched, then pulled a broken slate from a shelf. He handed her a piece of chalk. She looked at him with wide eyes, confused. "Draw," he said, guiding her hand gently. Together they made the first lines of a circle. Her silver eyes brightened slightly as she pressed harder, leaving marks of her own. For the first time she created something instead of being caged. But outside, whispers grew. The traders in the market had begun asking questions. Why had the human taken her? Why keep what was worthless? Rumors spread that the girl was dangerous, that she carried some hidden power. They spoke of dragging her back and teaching the human a lesson. The fragile beginning of trust inside that small apartment was already under threat. The alien girl did not know it yet, But her life with Daniel was a candle in a storm. One strong wind from the outside world could snuff it out. Still, that night, when Daniel turned off the lamp and lay on his bed, she whispered one word from her corner: safe. Her voice was soft, uncertain, but filled with hope. Daniel closed his eyes with a faint smile. He did not answer, but his silence was enough. In the fragile beginning of their story, the bond between a broken alien girl and a tired human janitor had begun to grow stronger. The city was alive with noise. Neon signs flickered in every color. Voices rose from narrow streets, and the smell of oil and smoke filled the air. Daniel walked through the crowd with his broom strapped across his back and a small bag of tools hanging at his side. Beside him, the alien girl stayed close, her glowing patterns faint beneath the folds of her blanket. It was her first real step into the outside world since leaving the market. Every sound made her flinch. Every shout made her shrink. But Daniel's steady steps pulled her forward. He did not hold her hand, but his calm pace gave her courage to follow. They stopped at the academy gates. Tall metal doors opened into wide halls filled with students and workers. Daniel was just a janitor here, cleaning when others were gone. But today he had brought her with him. She hesitated, staring at the massive walls as if they might close around her like another cage. Daniel looked down at her, his voice quiet. "It's all right," he said. "You stay close inside." The halls echoed with laughter and footsteps. Bright-dressed students carried books and gadgets. Some glanced at the girl, whispering behind their hands. Her glowing patterns caught attention, even if they were faint. A few chuckled, pointing at her blanket. One voice carried above the rest. "Is that the trash he bought from the market?" Her chest tightened, shame pressed down like a weight. She lowered her head, clutching the blanket tighter, but Daniel kept sweeping, his face calm. He said nothing. He never argued with them. He only worked. His silence was stronger than their cruel words. She watched him, confused. Why didn't he fight back? Why didn't he shout? In the market, weakness meant being crushed. But Daniel stood tall without speaking. His quiet strength seemed different, and she could not stop watching. Hours passed as he worked, fixing broken panels, wiping glass, carrying buckets of water. The girl followed quietly. Sometimes she tried to mimic his movements, lifting small scraps of paper from the floor. He noticed, gave a small nod, and kept working. That tiny approval made her heart feel warm. Later, when the halls emptied, Daniel sat on the steps, wiping sweat from his forehead. He offered her half of his bread. She hesitated, then sat beside him. The two of them ate in silence. For the first time, she sat not in a cage, not in a corner, but next to someone who treated her like she mattered. Outside the academy, the sky darkened with evening lights. The city grew louder. Traders barked their prices. Merchants shouted about their wares. Daniel walked with her through the crowd again, but the whispers followed. "That's the human who took the useless one. Poor fool. She will bring him nothing but trouble." Each word cut her deeper. She slowed, almost stopping. Her silver eyes lowered. Her shoulders hunched under invisible chains. Maybe they were right, maybe she was nothing but a burden. But Daniel noticed. He paused, waiting for her to meet his eyes. "Ignore them," he said. His voice steady, simple. "They don't decide who you are." She froze, his words ringing louder than the crowd. For so long, others had told her what she was. Trash, useless, weak. And she had believed them. But Daniel's words carried something heavier than insults. They carried truth. That night back at the apartment, she sat on the floor holding the blanket close. Her thoughts spun. The laughter in the market, the whispers in the academy, the cruel voices in the street. They all clashed against Daniel's calm words. She did not know which to believe, but when he handed her a small piece of chalk again and placed the slate before her, she slowly traced a circle, then a line, then another shape. He smiled faintly and drew beside her. Together they filled the slate with crooked shapes and lines. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. "I belong," she whispered. Daniel nodded once. "Yes, you belong." The words sank deep, filling the cracks in her heart with light. For the first time, she dared to believe it might be true. Outside, shadows moved in the streets. Traders who had lost face at the market spoke in low voices. They were angry. They wanted the girl back not because she was valuable, but because the human had made them look like fools. Plans were whispered in the dark. Inside the small apartment. However, hope had begun to bloom, fragile and new. The alien girl sat with Daniel, tracing shapes on the slate until her eyes grew heavy. As she lay down with the blanket wrapped tight, she whispered one word before sleep. Safe. Daniel looked at her from the table where he worked on a broken lamp. His face was calm, but his eyes softened. He did not answer, but his silence carried promise. In the world outside, danger was waiting, but in this small room, a fragile bond grew stronger. Each night, the night was colder than usual. Wind rattled the broken shutters of Daniel's apartment. The alien girl lay curled up under her blanket, listening to the distant hum of the city. But something felt wrong. Her glowing patterns flickered faintly, warning her of danger she could not yet see. Daniel sat at the table fixing an old lamp. His tools clicked softly in the silence. He worked late, as always, trying to bring light into their small home. He did not notice at first the heavy footsteps. Climbing the stairs, the sound was slow, purposeful. The alien girl sat up quickly, her silver eyes wide. Her body trembled as the voices reached their door. Harsh voices, familiar voices, she knew them, the traders. A hard knock shook the door. Daniel lifted his head, his jaw tightened. The voices outside growled, "Human, open up." Another knock followed, louder. "We know you have the girl. Give her back, she belongs to us." The girl's chest tightened. Her breath came fast and shallow. She scrambled back into the corner, pressing herself against the wall. She had known this would happen. No one ever escaped the market. She looked at Daniel, certain he would hand her over to save himself. Everyone always did. Daniel stood slowly, setting the lamp aside. He walked to the door. His hand rested on the handle. His heart beat heavy in his chest. He was no soldier, no fighter, just a janitor, with rough hands and a tired back. But when he glanced at the girl, small and trembling in the corner, he knew he could not give her up. He pulled his broom from the wall, holding it like a staff. He took a deep breath, then opened the door. 3 traders stood outside, their faces twisted with anger, their arms thick with muscle. One pointed a sharp blade at Daniel. "Step aside, human, she is ours, you cannot hide her." Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "She doesn't belong to you." The traders laughed cruelly. "To you, then? You think she is worth saving? She is nothing." One stepped forward, shoving Daniel's chest. "Move, or you will regret it." The alien girl's heart pounded. She shook her head, whispering through her tears. "No, no, no." She wanted to scream, to beg him not to fight. He would be hurt because of her. But Daniel did not move. His grip tightened on the broom. "She stays here," he said. His voice low, steady, more solid than she had ever heard. The first trader snarled and swung his blade. Daniel raised the broom, blocking the strike with a crack of wood. The sound echoed through the hall. The traders laughed louder. "A broom?" one mocked. "You fight us with a broom?" Daniel stood his ground. Sweat gathered on his brow. His arms shook from the blow, but he did not step back. "Leave," he said. "This is your only chance." The traders growled and circled him, ready to strike again. The girl's body trembled harder. She pressed her hands to her glowing patterns, begging them to hide her. But then, something strange happened. Her glow began to brighten. For the first time in years, the light under her skin pulsed strong, not weak. It spilled into the room, filling it with silver and blue. The traders stopped for a moment, startled. Their eyes widened. So, she was not broken after all, one muttered. The girl took a step forward. Her voice shook but carried strength. "No more cages," she whispered. Her light grew brighter. Her patterns glowed like fire. Daniel looked at her, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. He did not understand what was happening, but he knew one thing. She was no longer only the girl from the cage. She was becoming something more. The traitors cursed, their confidence faltering. The glow stung their eyes. Their threats turned to mutters. "We will return," one hissed, "and when we do, not even your broom will save you." With that, they turned and stormed down the stairs, their heavy footsteps fading into the night. Silence filled the apartment. Daniel lowered the broom, his arms shaking, sweat ran down his face. He had stood against them, and somehow they had left. The alien girl collapsed to her knees, her glowing patterns dimming once more. Tears streamed down her face. She thought she would be given away, but instead he had chosen to protect her. He had risked everything. Daniel crouched down beside her, placing a rough hand gently on her shoulder. "They won't take you," he said. His voice was steady. "Not while I'm here." She looked up at him, her silver eyes wet but shining. She whispered one word, the same word she had clung to since the night he freed her. "Safe." Daniel nodded, but his thoughts were heavy. He knew the traitors would return. He knew trouble had only just begun. But looking at her trembling form, he also knew he could not turn back now. The test of fear had come, and though both of them were shaken, their bond had survived, stronger than before. In the quiet night, the janitor and the alien girl sat together, knowing that the world outside would soon test them again. The night after the traitors left was heavy with silence. The alien girl sat on the floor with her knees to her chest. The blanket Daniel had given her slipped from her shoulders, but she did not pull it back. Her glowing patterns flickered faintly, fading and brightening like a fragile flame in the wind. Daniel sat at the table, his broom leaning against the wall beside him, his rough hands rubbed together slowly. He had faced men stronger than him, men with blades, and somehow stood his ground. But he knew it would not end there. The traitors would return, stronger, angrier. They would not forgive him for humiliating them. He glanced at the girl. She was trembling though the room was warm, her silver eyes wide with fear. She looked small, fragile, as if one more blow from the world would break her completely. Daniel's voice was steady when he finally spoke. "You are not theirs anymore." Her head lifted slightly. "Not theirs," she whispered. Her voice cracked. She wanted to believe it, but years of chains and cages had carved deep scars into her mind. The next day, Daniel returned to work at the academy. The alien girl walked close behind, her head lowered. As the students whispered, their words cut sharp. "That's the creature he's protecting. Why does he carry trash like that?" She should have been left in the market. Her heart sank with each voice. But Daniel's steady steps did not falter. He carried his broom and bucket as if their words were no heavier than dust. The girl stared at him, confused again. His silence was louder than their insults. It was strength. A strength she had never known. Later, as he repaired a broken panel, she crouched nearby, watching his hands. Her glowing patterns faintly lit the shadows under the stairs. Daniel noticed. He handed her a small tool. Her silver eyes widened. She shook her head quickly, afraid she would ruin everything. But he nodded, insisting gently. "Try." Her hands trembled as she pressed the tool against the panel. She missed, slipped. But Daniel only guided her hand with patience. Together they tightened a loose screw. For the first time she felt useful. For the first time she was not only being carried, she was helping. That night back in the apartment, Daniel sat at the table, sharpening the worn edge of his broom handle. The alien girl traced patterns on the slate with chalk. Her glowing light reflected softly against the marks. Suddenly, her chest tightened. She dropped the chalk and whispered, "They will come back." Daniel paused, his jaw clenched. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "But we will face them." Her silver eyes filled with tears. "I will break you," she said. "They will hurt you because of me." She shook her head, clutching her glowing arms. "Better if I go." Daniel leaned forward, his rough voice steady but firm. "No." He tapped the table with his finger. You stay. No one takes you again. Her breath caught, his words wrapped around her like chains, but these were not chains of iron. They were chains of protection, of belonging. She was bound now not by fear, but by trust, when the footsteps finally came again. The sound was heavier than before, more than 3 this time. The traders had brought others. Their voices echoed up the stairwell. "Human," one roared. "Your foolishness ends tonight. Give her back or be crushed." The alien girl froze, but then something shifted inside her. The memory of Daniel standing in the doorway with only his broom rose in her mind. His calm eyes, his steady hands, his words. "You belong." They lit a fire inside her chest. Her glowing patterns flared brighter than ever before. Daniel stood. Broom in hand, he looked at her and saw the light burning stronger. "Stay behind me," he said. But she shook her head for the first time. She stepped forward beside him. The traders burst through the door, faces twisted with rage. Their weapons gleamed under the flickering lamp. But when they saw her glowing patterns shining like silver fire, they faltered. Their laughter died, replaced with unease. The girl raised her trembling hands. Her voice shook but carried weight. No more cages. The glow spread from her body, spilling across the room. The traders shielded their eyes. Some stumbled back, muttering. She was not broken. She was only waiting. Daniel gripped his broom tighter, ready to fight, but the traders backed toward the hall. Their confidence crumbled in the face of her light. "This isn't over," one spat. "We will return, and when we do, not even your human courage will save you." They retreated, their heavy boots pounding down the stairs. Silence fell. The alien girl dropped to her knees, her light dimming. Daniel rushed to her side, steadying her before she collapsed. She looked up at him, her silver eyes wet but fierce. "I stood," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Daniel nodded, his rough hand steady on her shoulder. "You did," he said softly. "You broke their chains." Her lips trembled, and for the first time she smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. She was no longer just the unwanted girl in the cage, she was more. She was free. That night, as Daniel repaired the lamp and she sat beside him tracing new shapes on the slate, the room felt different. It was no longer only a shelter. It was becoming a home. And for the first time in her life, she believed the chains of her past were gone. The days after the traders fled were calmer. For the first time since leaving the market, the alien girl woke without fear clawing at her chest. The blanket Daniel had given her still wrapped around her shoulders. But now she held it not for survival but for comfort. Her glowing pattern shimmered faintly, no longer weak, no longer fading. Daniel swept the floor with steady strokes. His broom moved like it had always done. But now the room felt different. The silence inside the apartment was no longer heavy. It was warm. The alien girl sat at the table, chalk in hand, carefully tracing letters Daniel had shown her. She pressed the lines crooked and uneven, but each mark was hers. Daniel leaned over, nodding. His rough voice spoke softly. "Good." The girl's silver eyes brightened. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, a smile that had been locked away for years. Outside, the world was still cruel. Whispers followed them through the streets. Traders still spat their threats in the alleys, but inside, something stronger than fear was growing. At the academy, Daniel worked as always, fixing broken machines, cleaning long halls. The girl stayed close. Sometimes she helped, holding tools or sweeping small corners. Students still whispered, some mocked. But others began to notice the way Daniel stood tall, the way the girl followed him with glowing eyes that no longer looked like a slave's eyes, but a survivor's. One evening, Daniel brought home a small basket from the market. Inside were vegetables and bread. The alien girl stared at the food, blinking in surprise. He set it on the table and handed her a knife. "Help," he said, simply. Her hands shook as she sliced clumsily. Daniel guided her fingers, showing her how not to cut too deep. Together they cooked a simple meal. The smell filled the small room, warm and rich. She had never made food before, only eaten scraps tossed at her feet. Now she stood at the stove with Daniel beside her, stirring, tasting, learning. When they sat at the table, the girl lowered her head. "For me?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded. "For us?" Her chest tightened. Tears filled her silver eyes. She had never been part of an us. She had always been nothing. Now she was something. They ate slowly. She laughed once by accident, a small, broken laugh when Daniel made a face at the bitter taste of the soup. The sound startled her, but Daniel smiled. "It's good," he said, "better than eating alone." The girl touched the bowl, her voice trembling. "Home," she whispered. The word felt strange, heavy, powerful. Daniel looked at her, his tired eyes softening. He gave a single nod. Home. That night, the city outside roared with noise. Traders still schemed, shadows still gathered, but in that small apartment a fire had been lit, not of anger, but of belonging. The alien girl curled up under her blanket, her glowing patterns casting soft light across the wall. Daniel sat at the table fixing a broken clock. The ticking gears clicked in rhythm with their quiet breaths. Before sleep took her, she whispered one last word, a word she now believed with all her heart: safe. Daniel did not answer, but his silence was full of promise. The next morning the sun rose brighter through the cracked window. The alien girl stepped outside with Daniel, her feet no longer dragged, her eyes no longer stayed on the ground. She walked beside him, shoulders straight, for the first time. She looked like she belonged to the world and not to a cage. The people who passed them stared. Some whispered cruel words, but others looked away quickly, uneasy at the glow under her skin. Daniel ignored them as always, and the girl followed his example. For the first time, their words did not sink into her heart. She held Daniel's silence like armor. When they returned home, she picked up the chalk again. She wrote slowly, pressing hard. When she finished, she looked up at him with a trembling smile. On the slate were 3 shaky letters, the first word she had written, us. Daniel stared for a moment, then gave a rare, quiet laugh. His hand rested on her shoulder, strong and steady. "Yes," he said, "us, the alien girl who nobody wanted, who had been mocked, beaten, and forgotten, now sat in a small room that felt brighter than any cage of gold. She was not trash, not weak, not worthless. She was alive. She was safe. She belonged, and it had all begun because one tired human janitor had chosen to stop, to look, and to open a cage no one else would.